So today's daf in the Sechet Bava Batra, we have a few Mishnayot today. So if others join, they'll join for the next ones. Is Samach Zayin 67? Is that right? I think I got it right. And we're up to the Mishnah. I think you got up to a third line from the top. So we've been discussing in Perik HaMocheret HaBayit in Bava Batra, when you sell a house, what's included in the sale? Says this Mishnah, what if you sell a larger structure? So you don't sell a house, you sell a chatzer. Remember, a chatzer is a courtyard, but usually, now we'll see it's a machloket in the Mishnah, we generally think of a chatzer as a space that includes many houses, right? So it's a private courtyard where two or more houses open up into one common space. Obviously, we discussed a lot, Erev Chatzerot and things like that in Masechet Erevin. Let's say you go and you sell the entire courtyard. So HaMocheret HaChatzer, says the Mishnah, Machar Batim, well, you sold the houses in the Chatzer, and you sold barot shichin u'ma'arot. Unlike a house, remember we said in a house you exclude the pits and the ditches and the spaces for water and everything. That's included in the chatzer. And Rashbam sort of explains that it's a bigger sale basically. So although in a house you might have excluded those things, in a chatzer you meant to get rid of the whole thing. Aval lo metaltolin, but what you don't include in sale are things that move, meaning the refrigerator or things like that are not included in the sale. And Miriam, we'll read that first line again. I just started early morning where you are. So the Mishnah Daf Samach Zayin, it says if you sell a chatzer as opposed to what we've had till now selling a house, then you include all of the houses that open to the chatzer. And if in those houses, the barot shichin u'ma'arot. So even though they wouldn't be included if you sold the house, they are included if you sell a chatzer. But it doesn't include movable things that can move from the house. And we had earlier, of course, some of these examples, like the lock in the door and things like that. Bisman she'omer lo hu v'chol ma shebetocho. If the sale is said at the time, I'm selling you the courtyard and everything that's inside of it, then that includes metaltalin. Hari kulan mechurin, then it's all sold, even the things that are physically inside of it that can be moved. The fact that you said everything inside of it means even things that are metaltalin. Now, benkach or benkach, whether you say I'm selling you the courtyard alone, or you say I'm selling you the courtyard and lo machar, you didn't sell lo et merchatz, not a bathhouse. If it's within the courtyard, let's say you have it's a big courtyard and you had a little mini bathhouse inside the courtyard. That is not part of the sale. That's considered to be its own entity. It's not part of a courtyard. It's not integral to a courtyard or houses. It's a separate business basically, and you'd have to sell it separately. Below beit habad shebetocho, and not an olive press inside this courtyard. Right. So if you have an olive press, again, just saying I'm selling you this courtyard and everything inside of it, that does not include sort of separate structures that are unrelated to its dira, to its inhabitants. Now,
well, we're presuming he owns all the houses in the courtyard, right? He doesn't have a right to sell someone else's house.
Right. He must own it. Yeah, of course.
He owns everything in all the other houses in the courtyard.
Correct.
So then we could also say he owns the bathhouse.
No, he does own. He has to own the bathhouse. Obviously, you can't sell it if you don't own it. The point is that if you go to someone and say, "I'm selling you this courtyard," that includes and everything inside of it. That includes the courtyard, the houses, all the possessions in the houses, but not a separate essential bathhouse that's inside the courtyard. That would now, if you said, "I'm selling you this and the bathhouse," of course you'd include it, but you have to speak it out.
But it's his bathhouse. Why isn't he selling everything in the courtyard?
He is, but he's not selling the separate structure that's in the courtyard. He's selling, if there's a bicycle riding on the ground next to it, that's included. But this is excluded.
But he's selling the other houses there. They're separate structures.
Correct. But this is not included. Rebbe Eliezer Omer, HaMocheret HaChatzer, Lo Macher Elav Yirash HaChatzer. Says Rebbe Eliezer, I disagree with the whole idea. If you say to someone, I'm selling you the courtyard, you just sell the courtyard. You're not selling any of the houses. You're not selling anything. The courtyard means the airspace, meaning the courtyard itself, not the airspace, but the actual courtyard, but not the houses that open onto the courtyard. I'm just telling you, I'm selling you this central space, not the houses that are part of the courtyard. So obviously, Rebbe Eliezer is a whole different opinion. Tanur Rabbanan, says the Braita, first word in the Gemara. HaMocher HaChatzer, Mocher Batim HaChitzonim uBatim HaPnimim. If you sell a chatzer, you sell both the external houses and the internal houses. And we understood this more to being external, meaning houses that you can you can get to straight from the courtyard, meaning from the courtyard you walk into the house, and internal means the ones beyond that, right? So the inner house. Remember we had earlier, if you sell the outer house, you don't necessarily sell the inner house, etc. But here, again, because you're selling a courtyard, you include everything. So all of the houses that open into the courtyard, even the ones that don't open directly, are sold. And furthermore, you sell Beit HaChusaot. Now we're going to have a Chusaot a little bit later. It's really unclear what Chusaot are. It literally means houses of, or not as houses, but spaces of Chusa. Chol, of course, means sand. So that's the Rashbam's interpretation, is that's referring to a place where they would dig out like a pit of sand. Others have like lime or things like that. Why exactly you would sell that, it's not clear. I mean, I heard one explanation that sand was a really integral thing because, their floors were always getting wet and muddy, and you had to constantly be covering them with dry stuff. So they'd have to have a whole separate, basically, section of dry, sand in a courtyard. But either way, the Breita says that's included in the Chatzer.
What does it mean to be the chitzonim from the courtyard? I would think that would mean from the outer street, the houses that the entrance and then the courtyard is within all the houses, right?
No. That could be the case, but that's not how we generally think of the courtyard opening onto the street and the houses opening onto the courtyard. So, but within that, you can have a house within another house, as of course we've had before. So the chitzon is the house that opens onto the courtyard. The pnimi is the house that opens into the other house that then opens into the courtyard. And again, we had earlier the discussion that if you only sell one house, you don't necessarily sell the inner house or the outer house. But when you sell a whole courtyard, you sell everything.
So the courtyard opens to the street?
Yeah, the courtyard opens to the street. That's how we had it. Remember in Erevin, or to a mavoi if you have a bigger one. But yeah, courtyard opens up to the street, and the houses open up onto the courtyard. It's like a cul-de-sac, basically. Continues the Breita. Chanuyot ptuchot letocha. Right. Let's say you have stores. So we are. Let me just orient ourselves. We are the last of the narrow lines. Last word on the line. You go to someone and say, "I'm selling you my whole courtyard." And within the courtyard, besides being houses, there are stores, right? Which would be common. You'd have stores on the street level. If the stores open into the courtyard, then nimkeret ima, they're also sold, even though they're not places where you live. They're places that are buildings that are part of the courtyard. But if she'ein petuchot l'tocha, if the stores don't open into the courtyard, they back up to the courtyard, but their front door and their opening is on the street, then ein nimkeret ima, then they are not sold with the courtyard. But if tuchot l'kan, like very commonly, right? You have an opening to the street and an opening into the courtyard. So then most of the Bach takes out the next two words, elo and nimkeret ima. Those are sold with the courtyard. Rabbi Eliezer says, well, this is our Mishnah, hamocheret hachatzer lo macheret ela miluso shel chatzer. If I go to someone and say, I'm selling you my courtyard, I don't mean the houses at all. I just mean the courtyard itself. I don't mean any of the things around it. Now, that's the Breita, which is the same as our Mishnah. Amar Mar, now I'm quoting the Breita, Ptuchot lekan and keret ima. If your stores are open to the Breshut Harabim on one side and the Chatzer on the other side, and I sell the Chatzer, I include the stores in the sale. Ask the Gemara, is that true? Vahatani Rabbi Chia taught a Breita which said, Einim keret ima, that the stores are not sold with it in that case. Answers the Gemara, Lokasha, that is not a problem. Derov tashmishtayu legav. Derov tashmishtayu lebar. It depends on whether the majority of usage is facing inward or facing outward. Meaning, the fact that there's a doorway that opens either to the public or to the chatzer does not define the status of the store. It depends on how you use it. If it's the kind of store where you basically are mainly selling it to people on the inside of the chatzer, meaning it's a private store, it's not open to the public, basically, then it's sold along with the courtyard, even if there's a door in the back. And if it's a kind of store which is open to the public, and most people who come in from the street, then although it does have a back door to the courtyard, it does not count as being part of the courtyard, and it would not be sold with it. So again, it really just depends on the context. That's what we're answering it for Rabbi Chia.
Are we saying there's a separate entrance from the courtyard to the street? That means there's like a wall that separates this courtyard from the street, and people have doorways through that wall that allows them to enter the street?
That's not what we're saying. But
what does it mean to say a courtyard opens to the street?
The courtyard has like a cul-de-sac. The entrance of the courtyard opens onto the street, and then the courtyard is deep. And as you go deeper, you walk 100 feet into the courtyard, and there's a door that opens to a house.
Well, a cul-de-sac is not a courtyard, but it's just an
I
open
understand.
space.
I use the cul-de-sac as an example.
I
think
understand, but it's an
different.
open space. You drive down the road, it's an open
Right,
space.
so
And
put walls
there's
around
a
the
yard.
cul-de-sac, and that's your
What?
courtyard. Put
What?
walls around the cul-de-sac, and that's your courtyard.
So you put walls around it then.
Correct.
So then that is the separation of the courtyard into the street. And it's as if there may be a doorway in the wall that would allow one to go from the courtyard to the street.
You have a space that opens, that's in a wall, that has an open space in the middle. The back door is into this courtyard, and the front door is to, well, it depends what you call back or front. One door is to the street, and one door is to the courtyard.
Okay, so there is a doorway then, from the courtyard to the street.
No, yes, but that's not you mean from the store is what you're saying?
No, I'm saying, if we're saying the courtyard opens to the street, if it's
Correct.
already open, if it's already an open area, like a cul-de-sac, there's no really courtyard there. It's all an open area. But if you set up a wallway,
All right, so
and
again,
then so the
the
courtyard is
cul-de-sac
behind the
was meant to be,
wall, and then the
I'm
houses
sorry.
are in the back of the okay, then I
The
understand
cul-de-sac was
that.
meant to illustrate a point. That a courtyard has four walls. It's a building, right? It has four walls.
That's what I'm saying. There's a wall.
Correct. It's a courtyard.
Okay.
I don't understand. You've never seen a courtyard? What's the question exactly?
No, when I think of a courtyard, I've got houses, and then the courtyard is the backyard, and houses open to that courtyard.
Right. So
I don't
that's
think
not
of a
correct. That's not, just to be clear, it's not what we mean or what we ever mean in the Gemara when we talk about a courtyard. The courtyard's the front. The street opens to the courtyard, and the courtyard opens to the houses.
Okay, I
That's
haven't seen that. I'm not familiar with that. That's
Okay.
okay. All right.
That's how it always, we've all, in our whole Gemara for years, we've been talking about that. So you go from a street into a courtyard, and from the courtyard, you go into different houses. If we had a Gemara, I could draw it for you.
Okay, I understand that. I never thought of it that way.
But that's how the Gemara always is referring. Every Chatzer in the Gemara pretty much refer. Remember in Erevin, you put up a Erev, you put up a Makkah, you put up a thing, the Yumdin, on the side of the entranceway from the street into the courtyard. That's how you make an Erev Chatzerot, right? You close off the
I'm
courtyard.
familiar with Erev Chatzerot, but you can make that within from the houses into the Chatzer. If you're in an apartment building, for instance, you can make Erev Chatzerot, but it's within the apartment building, and with you people share things from different floors.
That's not, yeah. Again, I don't want to get distracted by Erev Chatzerot.
I don't want either. I don't want to get distracted.
So that's the case. So you have houses around a courtyard in Jerusalem, where Miriam is. This is very, very common, of course, right? That's how they built things. But obviously, it's not always the same in Riverdale. So again, if you have a store, a level store, basically that has a door to the street and a door to the chatzer, it depends on the common usage. Let's continue. We're at the two dots in the middle, actually smack in the middle of Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Rebbe Eliezer says, that in fact, if you sell the chatzer, you only sell the aerospace of the chatzer. Now says Rava, Amar Rava, that's how we change the girsa. It really depends on what you say when you sell it. Because Ida Amar Le, if you use the word darta, now darta is an Aramaic word, and we're going to see in a second what darta means, but it presumably means did I say the word darta? I said the word dirata, sorry. If you say the word derta with a yud, then that implies a dira, a place where you live. And kuli ama lo pliga debati mashma. Everyone agrees, even Rebbe Eliezer, that you mean to sell the houses. You're not, if you say, you mean, again, the Rashbam explains, you didn't say to the person, I'm selling you a chatzer and the derata. You said, I'm selling you derata, right? That means, it's a word we use for a courtyard, but it has within it the word houses, dira. And therefore, you're definitely selling the houses within the courtyard with the courtyard. So he agrees to the Tanakama. Ki pligi, where Rebbe Eliezer disagrees, is the Amrle darta. If the word you used for courtyard was the word darta, which again is an Aramaic word, there the question is, what do you mean by that word? Mar savar tarbitza mashma. The Rebbe Eliezer holds it means the air. Tarbitza means the airspace. It only means the air around it. The tarbitza literally means the gardens, right? Like the space. And Mar savar bate mashma, and the Tanakama holds it means the houses. So it's a language issue. Now, Ikadamri, some had this a little bit even more detailed. Amar Rava, again, change it to Rava. Ida Amar le darta. No, if he said the word darta, then kuli amalo pligi debati mashma. Everyone would agree that in fact includes houses, because even though the word darta is Aramaic for courtyard, because it sounds like dara, it sounds like the place where you live, it includes the houses. Ki pligi to amar le chatzer. It's where, and this is, of course, when you read the Mishnah, this is the obvious reading of the Mishnah. So Rashbam says this seems very likely. If you said the word chatzer, which is an unusual word to say, I'm selling you a courtyard. I didn't say I'm selling you the place to live, right? I'm selling you the courtyard. There, the question is, do you mean just the courtyard, right? It just means the airspace of the chatzer. Think about the Mishkan, right? When we talk about the Mishkan, we say the Mishkan, the Chatzar of the Mishkan was 50 by 100. That obviously includes not just the open space, it includes the Kodesh, the Kodesh Kodeshim, right? That's included within the overall space. And so just like by the Mishkan, and it's pretty common usage, you describe a courtyard or space, I use the word courtyard here, but a Chatzar, the Chatzar includes the houses within the Chatzar. And so when you sell a house, a Chatzar, that's what you're selling. Now, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, remember the last thing we had in our Mishnah was this thing called, or at least in the Gemara, was a chusit. Said Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Machar lo chusit umitzula. Let's say you sell this chusit. Remember, chusit, the simplest meaning was it was a pit where you had a lot of sand in, right? It was a sand pit. So you sell that, and next to it, and the Rashbam here, it's a little bit strange. The Rashbam actually said it earlier, and I gave a different explanation. But the Rashbam again points out that what people commonly used chol for was to make glass, right? You would use sand to make glass. So why exactly you would have this next to your house, unless you're a glass maker, is not so clear. But either way, next to your house, you have this chusit, the sand pit, and you have a mitzula. A mitzula, if you recall, was like it literally means like a trap, but it's like a little container of water, like a little fish pond, koi pond, basically, where you can fish inside of. Okay? These things are next to each other. So let's say a person sells, again, it's a very strange case, and we're bringing it because the chusit that we mentioned earlier. You sell someone a chusit and a mitzula, which are next to each other, a sand pit and a little pond. Hichsik b'chusit. Now, if the person makes a chazakah in the chusit, in the sand pit, then says Rava, Rav Nachman, lo kana mitzula. You don't automatically get a kinyan in the other thing. And if you're hichsik b'mitzula, if you make a kinyan in the mitzula, in the trap, lo kana chusit, you're not automatically koneh the chusit, right? So you don't automatically acquire the other one. I just forgot. I like to point this out because it's a lot of fun. But the Rashbam brings another opinion that sometimes people use the ponds not for catching fish, but for mining for gold, right? That it might be a little gold pond. So again, I don't know exactly what was going on in this guy's backyard, where he had some sand for glass, and then he was prospecting for gold next to it. But either way, something's funny is going on. But if you sell those two things, the halacha of Rava says is that if you sell one, it doesn't automatically get the other one. Says, is that true? Aini, but is that really true? We've had several times already. Amar Shmuel, 3 lines in the bottom. Let's say a person sells another person 10 fields in different places, right? A big real estate transaction. The guy's liquidating. He's got 10 fields in 10 different cities. Macharlo eser sadot be'eser medinot. 10 fields in 10 different countries. And kivan shichzik ba'achat mehem, if the person acquires one of them, they make a chazakah, then kana kulan, you acquire all 10 fields. So why in the world, if you said by 10 fields, acquiring one acquires all of them, why, if you make a kinyan in your sand pit, aren't you kona the stream right next to it that he's selling you? Answers the Gemara, obviously.
What is he selling? He's selling one of these 10, or he's selling all 10?
Sells all 10. Once the person makes a chazakah and one of them, he acquires all of them wherever they are.
But he bought all 10. So what does it mean that he acquires chazakah in one? He bought a 10, so he's got a chazakah in all 10.
So we've had this a couple of times. I think we've talked about it before, but it's a good question. The Rashbam goes through it again here. But let's say it's in a place where, remember we had earlier last week, we had this whole case where they had a rule that you had to have a shtar or some other kinyan. They weren't koneh with money alone, right? So if you're not koneh with money alone, then even though you paid for all 10, you have to make a subsequent kinyan beyond money, either a shtar or a chazakah, right? Remember we had last week the whole case with the non-Jew and you sold the field, etc. So here you paid for everything, but there was a custom that you didn't have a kinyan just from paying, and so you have to make a chazakah. But says Shmuel, once you make a chazakah on one of them, you're koneh all of them. So if that's the case,
but doesn't he? I'm gonna understand. Doesn't he have a shtar? If he says if he buys 10 of them, isn't that transaction done with a shtar in addition to the kesef? I mean, he made it. We said he sold all of them.
No shtar. There is kesef. You paid, but you didn't take a shtar. So you can acquire them by chazakah. Acquiring one acquires all of them. Again, the key point here is that even though you didn't pick up all 10, or you didn't do chazakah for all 10, The fact is that you did one and they're connected. Answers the Gemara, because Hatam, it's different. Hatam, who, there, remember Shmuel said this halacha because he said Sadna da'arachadu, that the Sadna, I guess that literally means like the source of the land, meaning if you go down, down, dig down, 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 they all are connected to the same place. All land is essentially connected in the core of the earth. And so meaning they're connected. And further, now you need two conditions. The second condition is Kula Chada Tashmishtahu. They're all used for similar things, for planting or for growing crops on. So therefore, acquiring one acquires all of them. But in this case, although these things are connected, right? They are next to each other. So therefore, you can be kona one. You think you can be kona the other. But here, they're totally different things. One is used for extracting sand to make glass or whatever. One is used for either fishing or gold mining or whatever, but they're completely different usages, and therefore a kinyan on one does not make a kinyan on the other.
So you're making an assumption with this land here. A person could use one for one parcel for farming, another one for building. He could use another one for grazing. He doesn't necessarily use all parcels of the land for the same thing.
It's true. So you're right, 100%, but it's possible that, but because you could, right? Because they are omeid, that's the Rashbam's language. They're able to be used for zri'ah. They're all able to be used for planting. It would count. Says the Gemara of Ikadami. Now some, turn the page now to some of Zayin Amabet, have another version. Amar Rava, Amar of Nachman, Hichzik b'chusit kana mitzula. That in fact, the reason we quoted this is because it is true that if you have a chusit, remember chusit is this sand pit, next to a mitzula, which is a riverbed or a stream or a pond or whatever, water that you capture fish in, then making a kinyan in one does give you a kinyan in the other. Says Mar Pshita, it seems pretty obvious because we know the halacha of Shmuel. To Amar Shmuel, don't we remember that Shmuel said, Machar lo eser sadot, remember, now we don't quote the whole Gemara again, but you sell 10 fields and you make a kinyan in one, you kona all the other ones. So why is that a chiddush that if you kona the chusit, you're also kona the mitzula next to it? And says the Gemara, because of what we just told you in Amar Aleph. It's not so simple. Because Ma'adutema, I would have thought, Hatam hu desadin to arachadu, there the land is all connected in some way. And furthermore, sorry, where am I? That's period. Here they have different function, different usage, and therefore you maybe cannot combine them. Kamashmon, that's not the case. And according to the second language, in fact, acquiring one will acquire the other one. And it seems like that's how we pass. Continues the Mishnah. So we are now 5 lines from the top of Samach Zayin Bed. And I'll tell you, this is a little bit tricky. I tried to look up things that made sense to me. I can't say I understand it exactly. But this Mishnah talks about, I'm going to give you the cheat sheet and then we'll try to learn it together. The Mishnah talks about, let's say, remember we said before, you sell a house, you don't include the barot shichrim morot. You sell a chatzer, it includes the barot shichrim morot, but it does not include the beit habad. So this Mishnah, or the merchatz, right? So this Mishnah comes to understand, what if you do sell a beit habad? What if you go to someone and say, I want to buy a beit habad, means an olive press, okay? So you can press other things too, but I want to sell the olive press. So what is included in that sale? So the basic principle the Rashbam says is that anything that's attached to the ground, or means semi-attached, right? That's permanent, is included in the sale. Anything that's disposable, right? That you add each time or you pick up and you can move easily is not included. So think of it that way, okay? Now the Gemara is about to go through many different parts of the olive press, and I can't really tell you that I understand what they all are, to be very honest. But the principle is what I just told you. If they're immovable, they're attached to the ground, then they're sold. If they're movable, they're not sold. Okay? I'll try my best. The other thing,
we had a whole discussion about this yesterday, day before, about the tzinur and the from the mikveh and the wall, right, of the baker's wall. And in the end, discussing whether it was attached or not attached, whether it was the Rabbanan, whether it was Rabbi Kiva. And so in the end, we came to Teku, that the Gemara said they couldn't come to a decision whether it was part of it, whether it was attached, not attached, and so forth. The whole series, and the Rashbam went through this whole thing with the Teku as well. So when you're saying we have a decision here, I don't know what to make out of that.
I don't know if I could share my screen, if this would help. I'm gonna do you think I can share my screen? Let's see. No, host disabled. Okay, well, I found. I'm gonna put this in the chat. Hopefully this helps. If you click on this website, because to be honest with you, I didn't understand the first two pictures on the website, but the third one was very helpful for me. Okay. Can everyone open that? Tell me if you can open it, and if you open it and you look at Gimel, the third one, that's actually what that's one explanation. I'm not really sure what this website is, so I don't want to verify it, but does everyone see that, or you don't see it, or I should
The
just
one with the Toanim Korot Beit Abad?
Yeah. So what you see in this third one, To'anim Korot Beit Abad means the thing that holds up. The Korah is that very, very heavy beam that's there, obviously, that's labeled Korah. And under the Korah is the screw, basically, right? Is the thing that it attaches to that pushes down on the olives, and then the olive oil comes out, right? What we're going to talk about, so let's read the Mishnah now, and we'll get there. The other thing that's important to remember, the main reason I want to show this picture is because of the two pieces of wood holding up the Korah, which we're going to talk about. And I didn't really understand what they looked like until I saw this picture. So you see that you have those two planks. The Gemara is going to call them the betulot, interesting. But anyways, well, let's see what they are in a second, okay? So the interesting thing about the olives, and we're going to get to all these details in the Gemara, is that if you take olives off a tree, or you can't press them, obviously, right? They're rock hard, right? Or not rock hard, but they're hard. So you have to let them soak for a while. You make bags, basically. You let them soak for a while and oxidize and, I don't know, ferment. And then you take that mush, that pulp, and then you would grind it, as you sort of see in this thing, right? Number B, which is tchinat hazeitim, or A, which I guess ktishat hazeitim. Ktisha is when you crush it, and tchina is when you grind it. And then you would take the pulp that was all ground, and you would use the korah, use the beam to put pressure on that in order for the olive oil to fall out. Okay. Now it says the Gemara. Let's read the Mishnah now. Hamocher beit abad. So we are. Oh, thank you, Miriam. You got another picture. That's from your Gemara. Okay. Hamocher beit abad.
It's actually the explanation that's under is very good. So
Okay.
it's really easy to understand what is what, because
Great.
it describes every single part.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys can all see Miriam's drawing, which comes from, I guess, Art Scroll.
Yeah.
So okay, it's not exactly the exact same, but well, it's interesting because it's not exactly what I showed you, just to be clear. So either way, it's not really clear to me what a Beit Habad, whether there's many ways to make it or different ways, but this is one that's a little simple. I'm not sure. It's a little too simple for me, but let's read the Mishnah. Hamocher Beit Habad, you sell a olive press. Says the Mishnah, Macharta Yam, you sold the Yam. We're going to see in the Gemara what the Yam is, but you can imagine it's a place where the olives sat and where you press them into. So it's basically the trough in the ground. Veta Mamal, you sold the Mamal, which at least we'll see in the Gemara in a second. According to this picture, is if you have the art scroll, is the screw, that the place where you're basically screwing something into. And Betulot. And the betulot here are the two side things, which this is one version. If you look at Miriam's art scroll, the one I showed you looks a little different and has a whole different version of the betulot, right? Where it's the side things that are holding up the beam. But either way, these are the side pieces. Again, the main point here is that these are all things that are fixed. They don't move when you go around. However, you did not sell avalo machar ta avirim, veta galgal, veta korah, and I'll read when the Gemara will explain what those three things are. Those are movable parts. Bisman shamar lohu v'chol betucho, chol masha betucho. If you say, I'm selling you the olive press and everything inside of it, then kulan mechurin. Then just like before, everything, even the movable parts, are sold. And Rabbi Eliezer says, one second, I disagree. No, he doesn't disagree the same way he did before. But here Rabbi Eliezer says, hamocher beit abad machar takora. That if you sold the beit abad, you always have to include the heavy beam, because it doesn't make any sense to not include the korah, which is the central feature of the Beit Habad. Okay, I don't know if you can see Miriam's picture. The korah in Miriam's is where there's the circle. The korah is the beam that's running horizontally. Again, it's not so clear. Right above, there's parallel beams, and then there's one that's running across. That's the korah. Says the Gemara, what are all these things? Yam, right? The Mishnah says you sold the yam. The yam is the tlafcha. The yam is the tlafcha, which literally means like a lentil. but means the place in the ground basically where you would put the olives in order. Well, it's one explanation,
It's
right?
a vat.
Where the olives were placed in order to be crushed, right? So they were placed there. It was a stationary thing, right? That's I don't know if there's an English word for that,
It's
but
a vat,
the vat. Oh, that's a great word. Thank you. Yes.
not mine.
That's Slavcha. Memel, what's the memo? So obviously this is a great Gemara. Amar Reb Abba Bar Mamel, right? That's his name. It's a mafrachta. The mafrachta, which the Rashbam here explains, means the thing you use to crush the olives before to sort of grind them up, essentially, before you press them.
A mortar.
The betulot, I said before, Rabbi Yochanan, those are klunsot shel erez. Those are the side beams that are made out of really strong cedar, right? Really strong, good wood. Shemamidim behen takora, that support the korah. So the picture I showed you is they have these really big, strong side beams. Miriam's picture, which is from the Art Scroll, as you know, has these as being the side beams as well, but it's a little bit different, right? Because they're there and they're supporting the screw in her case. Either way, again, the point is not, it doesn't really matter. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter as much, but the point is that they are fixed. Okay. Continues the Gemara. What are the other things in the Mishnah? Avirim, right? The Mishnah said you don't sell the avirim. The avirim are kivshi. The avirim, kivshi, literally means things you press, right? And so what the Rashbam explains, and it shows it well in the picture from the Art Scroll, that you would have a board, which we called the korah, but the board, which had all the pressure of that screw on it. But that board didn't cover the whole vat, right? So in order to spread out the pressure on the whole vat, you would have other boards underneath it that would basically spread out the pressure, right? And those, you pick them up and you take them and they break and they go away. And so those are considered to be movable and those are not included in the sale. So that's the crushing things basically.
Planks.
What's the word used?
Planks of wood.
Planks. Okay, that's a good word too. Galgal, a kivshi, sorry. No, where am I? The galgal is chumrata. The galgal is, in this case, it might be that screw, but in the other case, it's the way you hold it, like the thing the beam on the top, you see, that piece of wood that you would turn in order to turn that screw, basically. And the final thing is the korah, which of course we understand is the korah. And so again, all of these things are not included according to our Mishnah because they're movable. Tanu Rabbanan. Now the Braita includes more things. That's just why I gave the whole background.
It depends. One person says "V'chol mashu b'tocho harei kulan mechurim." In the Tanakama says yes.
You're ahead. We didn't get there yet. We're almost there.
You just said he doesn't say. The Mishnah says they're not so. But in the Mishnah it says if he says v'hu v'chol mashu b'tocho harei kulan mechurim. Everything.
Correct.
So even movable.
Correct. If you say correct, just like with the house, right? Included metaltalin. But if you don't say that, they're not included. But now the Braita adds things. This is a Tosefta. Tanura Banan, the Braita adds some of the parts. Tanura Banan, Mocher Beit Habad, you sell the Beit Habad, Machar Tanisarim, you include, now this literally means the board. So the Rashbam explains, these are not the same boards that our Mishnah said you don't include, because the Braita is not going to argue with the Mishnah. So Rashbam explains that these boards are boards that they would put up around the outside of the vat so it didn't splatter everywhere. And I guess they were permanent because they would be basically a barrier around the vat so that the oil didn't go everywhere and you lost your oil, right? You didn't want to lose it. So they would have nisarim, that's included. And the yikavim are included. Yikavim are vats, literally, where the olives would basically collect into. Veta mafrichot, which is what we had in our Mishnah, right? The things that you actually use to crush them. Vet harichayim atachtonot. Now, if you use a millstone to grind your olives, then remember with every millstone, there's a bottom part and a top part. The bottom part is the fixed part. So that's included. Avalo el yonah, but not the top part of the millstone because that's not included. That's the part that's movable, right? So those things are, again, it's the same principle. If they're sort of fixed, they're included. If they're not, they're not. And as you reminded us from the Mishnah, the Brisa says the same thing. Bisman shel marlo, if the seller says, Hu v'chol masha b'tocho, I'm selling you my olive press and everything that's included in it, then you include even the movable parts. Harikulan mechurin, right? However, Beinkach, now continues the Braita, whether you say who or whom chomasha b'tocho, lo machar lo at avirim, you don't include the avirim, and the avirim are what we had earlier. Actually, these are these are the boards that you would put to spread out the korah. V'lo at the sakim, you don't include the sakim. Sakim are the sacks. And lo martzufim, which the Rashbam explains are different kinds of sacks. One are sakim, he says, are made out of feathers, which is interesting, and the martzufim are made out of leather, right? So either way, these are basically things that you would put the olives in to let them, moist, just sit and stew. Those are not included in the sale. And Rabbi Eliezer says, "Hamocher beit habad," but if you sell, Rabbi Eliezer says, I disagree. If you sell a beit habad, you definitely include the korah, even though the korah is movable. But still, it's essential to the Beit Habad. Shelo nikra Beit Habad al Shem Korah, right? The whole point, the central feature of a Beit Habad is the thing that crushes the grapes, the olives, I mean. So you have to include that in the sale, even though it's movable. And so Rabbi Eliezer is, as he's did earlier, he's being much more medactic on the lashon of the person and not necessarily on whether it's movable or not movable. That's the olive press. The final Mishnah we're going to have tonight is the next case, which is mocher et hamerchatz. Right? If you sell a bathhouse, right? So we said again, if you sell a courtyard, you don't include the bathhouse, but let's say you specifically sell the bathhouse. Says the Mishnah, lo macharet hanisarim. It doesn't include the planks. The Rashbam explains that they put the planks on the floor so that, the floor was muddy or it was hot. So these were planks to protect you from getting cut or getting all dirty. Beta sfalim, and sfalim, so sfalim is a little bit complicated. Sfalim, literally, and the Rashbam explains it this way, means buckets, right? So they would take, you would take like some water and pour it on yourself when you're in the bathhouse. I think people do that today, right? So you would pour water on yourself. The other explanation of sfalim, which our Mishnah often, I think the Mishnah not in the Gemara has, is safsalim, that these were like chairs that you would have in the bathhouse. But either way, they're all movable parts. That's the main point, right? They're not fixed.
Safsal is a bench.
Right. That's but that's not what our Mishnah does. There's a girsa that says that. Our girsa is sfalim, which are, again, the Rashbam says buckets, basically, or containers. Eta balaniyot. Now, balaniyot is a very funny word, and there's a lot of different interpretations of it. Literally, remember, the balan is the bathhouse attendant, right? So balaniyot does not mean you didn't sell the bathhouse attendant, obviously. It's not what it means. It means things that they would use. So there's different interpretations of what they would use. So the simplest explanation are that they're referring to the towels that people would use to dry off with. Others, the Rashbam has a whole explanation that it's not balaniot, but it's vilaniot. Take out the bet and put a vav, and it's referring to curtains that they would hang it maybe for privacy or for coverage, things like that. Either way, things that are movable are not included. However, continues our Mishnah, just like the previous Mishnayot, Bisman shamarlo, if you say, Hi v'chol mashe b'tocho, it and everything inside of it, then even the movable things are sold. However, benkach, even if you say that, you haven't sold the basins, the big stores of water that are used, and not the big containers of wood that they would use to heat things up. So basically, if you had a big water tower and you had a big wood shed that you used to feed your bathhouse, because you use the water tower and wood shed for other purposes, they're not included in the sale of the bathhouse, right? So I sold you my bathhouse. I didn't sell you all the oil that goes along with it because I can use that oil for my restaurant or something else. So that's the Mishnah.
Where's the oil? Where's the word oil here?
Eitzim.
Eitzim.
There's fuel, the fuel of the bathhouse.
Well, that's I don't even see
Tanur Abanan, says the Gemara, Hamocher merchatz, if you sell a bathhouse, the Braita says, Machar Nisarim, you did sell Machar Beit Nisarim, not the Nisarim, as we said, right? You didn't sell necessarily the Nisarim themselves, but you sold the Beit Nisarim, which means the house where you stored these Nisarim. So Rashbam explains that on the side of the bathhouse, they would have these little storage rooms where you would put the towels and you'd put the boards that you put on the ground, you'd put the fuel, you'd put all these kind of things. So those are all included, right? Macharat Beit Nisarim, Bet Beit Yikamim, not 100% sure what the Yikamim are, but these are something they would use. The Rashbam is some like cover their hair with in the bathhouse, some kind of towel. Bet Beit Sifalim, right? Which again, based on the Mishnah, refers to these containers that you use to pour water on yourself. Bet Beit Vilaot and the curtains or the towels, depending on how you translate it. Either way, these are all the physical places. You would sold those places. Avolo et hanisarin atzman, but not the actual wood pieces. V'lo yikamin atzman, and not these hair coverings. V'lo sfalim atzman, v'lo vilanot atzman, meaning the movable things are not sold. It's just the rooms that they're contained in. However, that continues the Braita, Bisman shamarlo, if you say, Where am I? Bizman shamar lo hi v'chol ma shebetocho, then harei kulan mechurim. Then they're all sold. However, again, like our Mishnah, benkach ubenkach, whether you say that or not, lo machar lo et habrechot hamesapkot lo mayim. You don't sell the pools that provide water to the bathhouse. Bein bimotech chama, bein bimotech shamim. Whether it's the summer or the winter, Rashbam says because in the summer there's less in them, in the winter there's more. Either way, you're not part of the sale. The lo beit kinusat ha'itzim, and you don't sell the place where you gather the wood to be, your basically your woodshed for your fuel for your bathhouse. That's not included in the sale. However, finally, im amarlo, top of daf samachet amid aleph, if you say to the person, I'm selling you beit hamerchatz v'chol tashmishav ani mocher lecha, right? I'm selling you the bathhouse and everything I use for the bathhouse, then you are including the water source, you are including the heating source, everything is included. Kulan mechurin, everything is then included in that sale. And let's take 2 minutes, even though it's late, because the next sugya is, we'll get to our Mishnah. There was a case, Rahuda Amrle Lechavre, a person said to somebody else, I will sell you my Beit Habad, right? Going back to the earlier Mishnah. I'll sell you my olive press, v'chol tashmishav ani mocher lecha, and everything that we use for it, right? So there, it sounds like you should sell everything, right? However, havi hanu chanvata avrai. There were these stores, right? Chanvata literally means a store, but it means a storage area outside of the olive press. So the olive press was a building. Right outside it, you had a place. The havi shatchu buhu sumsumi. They would throw out, they would put out to dry sesame, right? So one of the things they would crush in their olive press, I keep using olive press, but a press is a press, right? And so they would crush sesame to get sesame oil, which is very good then and now, right? So again, probably you can't just crush sesame that's raw. You have to dry it out, I guess. Not that I've ever done this, right? So they had a part right outside of the olive press of the press where they would put the sesame. So I said to the guy, I'm selling you my olive press or my press and everything that comes with it. Is that included? Right? So Atu the Kamed Rav Yosef, so they came in front of Rav Yosef to find out. Amaleni said, well, if you look at this file in Braita that we just read, Tanina, we said, Im Amar, if you said, Beit HaMerchatz v'chol tashmishav ani mocher lecha, right? I'm selling you the Beit HaMerchatz and all of the things that you use with it, then everything is included. Harei kulan mechurin. And therefore, the equivalent case by the Beit Habad is that every single thing that's used as part of the Beit Habad, including the place where you put your sesames, should be included. So that's how Rav Yosef paskin. I'm only Abaye, but Abaye said it's a very nice halacha. But I remember Rabbi Chia telling us, so Tani Rabbi Chia, or I have a Braita from Rabbi Chia that says Ein kulan mechurin, that they are not sold. Ella says in Amar Ravashi, chazinan. The reality is it's not so simple because you need to have two clauses. I amarle, if the seller says to the buyer, Beit Habad v'chol tashmishav, I'm selling you the Beit Habad and all of the things that go with it, the Elan mitzarna, and these are the borders. And in the borders, you included the outside area where the sesame was laid out. Then you're konen, right? Now the Rashbam reminds us, kani, v'ilo lo kani. The Rashbam reminds us that we learned last Motzaei Shabbat, I believe, right? That even if you give borders, we don't take the borders literally, right? Remember, we say that mitzarim here chivlo, right? You just gave generous borders, but you didn't necessarily include everything in the borders. So just saying I'm selling you the Beit Habad and you giving borders that include the outside would not be enough. You have to say I'm selling you the Beit Habad and everything that goes along with it, and then saying, and the borders include the storehouses outside. If you say all of that, then everything is included. But if you don't, it's not included. So basically, we're concluding here that you need two conditions. You need to say the borders, but that's not enough because just giving borders does not prove that you want to sell everything within those borders, as we discussed last week. You have to say, I'm giving you these external borders and I want to sell you the Beit Habad and everything that's used along with the Beit Habad. And then you sell even the outside part where you would lay out the sesame seeds. And that gets us to our Mishnah, which we, God willing, will continue tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. or as the case might be for you, Miriam.
We'll find out.
I'm
going to your favorite place now.
Okay. Enjoy.
You know what I'm talking about?
Hotel, I'm guessing.
I'm going down to En Gedi.
Oh, wow. Oh, then I won't be able to see it. Well, that's even better. So enjoy. I hope it's not too hot. And
That's why I'm
see
leaving
you.
early.
We don't see you. We'll see everyone else tomorrow at 7:45 a.m., including Rosa. Shavua tov.
Shavua tov.